Good evening. On behalf of the Department of English at Harvard University and of the university as a whole, I welcome you to this memorial event in mourning and celebration of our beloved friend and colleague Seamus Heaney. I extend a special welcome to a few honored guests. Robert Shapiro of the Board of Overseers of Harvard University, Mike Smith, Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, and Deanna Sorensen, Dean of the Arts and Humanities Division of the faculty. The Consul General of Ireland in Boston, Breondan O'Coily, and Vice Consul Gillian O'Keefe. Most especially, I welcome the Heaney family who have flown the Atlantic to be with us today. Mari, Catherine, Michael, and Christopher. We are moved and honored by your presence. The readers and musicians performing at this evening's event, all but one, are members of the Department of English, faculty, junior, senior, and emeritus, students, undergraduate and graduate, staff, and alumni. We welcome also a colleague from our neighbor, the Department of Celtic Languages and Literatures. All our names are in the program, with those of the ushers also from the English department. Most of the rest of the department is here too, scattered through this great church. Many not on the program contribute to this event. I would mention especially Anna MacDonald, Gwen Odang Brown, Henry Vega Ortiz, Case Kearns, and Julia Atwood. The department owes deep thanks to Sean and Judy Pelfrey, Masters of Adam's House, to Richard Campbell, Memorial Church Sexton, and Jonathan Galassi from Farrar Straus, who allowed us to reprint the poems in the booklet you have in your hand. I'd note that one of the poems excerpted in this booklet, Station Island, is not the poem that will be read. The poem listed in the brochure, The Underground, is to be read in its place, so don't be confused. I note also that the original text of the translations from Old Irish and Old English, Pangoban and an excerpt from Beowulf, are in the brochure, not the booklet, but both will be read before Seamus's translation, if you want to follow along. Finally, I should mention that Matthew Aucoin's setting of Kinship 4 is performed this evening for the first time and was written in honor of this occasion. Seamus Heaney was at Harvard off and on for nearly 30 years, between 1979 and 2007. First as a visiting lecturer, then as Boylston Professor of Oratory and Rhetoric, finally as Ralph Waldo Emerson Poet in Residence. During much of this time, as we will hear, he was also an associate of Adam's House. What his time here meant, we will try to express over the next 80 minutes, but is not for me to put into words, partly because there would be too much to say, partly because both of the greatest gifts Seamus shared, his poetry and his friendship, were given even in the classroom to individuals, and now remain with each of us alone, joined as we are by memories, tonight by grief, and always by gratitude. Seamus's poetry is for the world, not only in the sense that all great poetry is for the world, but because it so reaches for the world, present, past, and future, with a hungry eagerness, never afraid of the encounter with the alien. But he addresses us person to person, voice to voice. Reading him in a new way these past few weeks, of course we have mourned, but mourning does not easily become this poetry. Even tonight, listening again to the rich, easy words, I wager you will find it impossible not to rejoice.
The Master. He dwelt in himself like a rook in an unroofed tower. To get close, I had to maintain a climb up deserted ramparts and not flinch, not raise an eye to search for an eye on the watch from his coin of seclusion. Deliberately, he would unclasp his book of withholding, a page at a time, and it was nothing arcane, just the old rules we all had inscribed on our slates, each character blocked on the parchment, secure in its volume and measure, each maxim given its space. Tell the truth. Do not be afraid. Durable, obstinate notions, like quarrymen's hammers and wedges, proofed by intransigent service, like coping stones where you rest in the balm of the wellspring. How flimsy I felt climbing down the unrailed stairs on the wall, hearing the purpose and venture in a wing flap above me.
Poet's Chair is a poem in 3 distinct and quasi-independent movements. Therefore, the excerpt is actually the 3rd movement of the poem. The work was inspired by the work of a sculptor and friend in Ireland, Caroline Mulholland. Part 3, which I'm about to read, was printed as a single broadside sheet, which the poem shares with a linoleum block print by Seamus's great friend, the sculptor Dimitri Hadzi, a second intertwining with an artist friend. And furthermore, the broadside was prepared and printed for an occasion at Adams House, May 15th, 1993, celebrating Yana and Bob Kiley's 20th year as masters of Adams House. It was presented to them on that occasion. This is why I chose this poem, because that single printed object weaves together fittingly several of the seats of Seamus's extensive and convivial life among us. It calls to mind not only Adams House, but Dimitri Hadzi's studio in East Cambridge, a great seat of fondest Seamus memories, and the locus of his and Mari's deep shared friendship with Dimitri and Cynthia. I found the poem hanging in another one of Seamus's great seats in the Berkshires in Coleraine at the home of Alfie and Sally Aucoin. And Christopher, Michael, Catherine Ann, your father's words. My father's plowing 1, 2, 3, 4 sides of the lee ground where I sit, all seeing at center field, my back to the thorn tree they never cut. The horses are all hoof and burnished flank. I am all foreknowledge of the poem as a plowshare that turns time up and over, of the chair in leaf the fairy thorn is entering for the future, of being here for good in every sense.
The fragment. Light came from the east, he sang, bright guarantee of God, and the waves went quiet. I could see headlands and buffeted cliffs. Often, for marked courage, fate spares the man it has not marked already. And when their objection was reported to him, that he had gone to bits and was leaving them nothing to hold on to. His first and last lines, neither here nor there. Since when, he asked, are the first line and last line of any poem where the poem begins and ends?
Meise agus Pangar Bán. Meise agus Pangar Bán, Kechter Nather frí a handán, Bíth a venevas of Frishelg, ma veneva Cain Hancherd. Karim se fus fair cach clú, ag me levrán léir inganú, ní bhuilimdach frim Pangar Bán, Carid Keshin a Vachdán. Óra bíomh scéal ken scíis, in our degdish, our ninedish, ní táithan dí chríochade clus ní fristardav or naithas. Gnáth uirih aggressive gal, glenad luch in a línsov. As mé da thit lín chéin, diligid norid gan run chéil. Fuachid shev frifrega fall, a rusk ang léise covláin, fuachim chéin fri féige fish, mar rusk réil, kesho imdish. Fáilis of gnéine dul, ing len loch in a géir chrov, I dugu chest norid nil, os mé chinne am fáilid. Cia bemme avan nach ré, ní dervan koch a chéle, math le cachter nár a dán, sovictus a einarán. Fession as chamsid dau, en vuid don gní cach ein lau, dat havert dorid de lé, forma vod Cain am Meise. And this is Seamus's translation. Pangar Bán and I at work, adepts, equals, cat and clerk. His whole instinct is to hunt, mine to free the meaning pent. More than loud acclaim, I love books, silence, thought, my alcove. Happy for me, Pangar Bán, child plays round some mouse's den. Truth to tell, just being here, housed alone, housed together, adds up to its own reward, concentration, stealthy art. Next thing, an unwary mouse bears his flank, Pangar pounces. Next thing, lines that held and held meaning back begin to yield. All the while his round, bright eye fixes on the wall, while I focus my less piercing gaze on the challenge of the page. With his unsheathed perfect nails, Pangar springs, exults, and kills. When the longed-for difficult answers come, I too exult. So it goes, to each his own. No vying, no vexation, taking pleasure, taking pains, kindred spirits, veterans. Day and night, soft purr, soft pad, Pangar Bán has learnt his trade. Day and night, my own hard work solves the cruxes, makes a mark.
Thank you. Harvard can be a strange and difficult place for a newcomer, freshman, professor, or poet. I remember a new colleague telling me that although everyone was friendly and polite, He could not find the center of the place. He always felt lost. That was not Seamus. Seamus had his own center. He also had his own home at Harvard. When he first came to the university in 1979, the English department welcomed him warmly as visiting professor. But it was in 1981, when he moved into eye entry of Adams House, that he became one of us, a neighbor, a friend, a member of the family. The guest suite in eye entry was not a 5-star accommodation. These rooms were only a step up from the days of the founding Puritan fathers. There was indoor plumbing, electricity, a bed, a desk, a table, and a few chairs. A visiting professor who had arrived near midnight some years earlier phoned me to say that the place had no door, and she was afraid to go to bed. Buildings and Grounds had been working on the room and had not quite finished their job. I told her to pile furniture at the threshold and try to get some sleep. We did install a door before Seamus arrived. In any case, he never complained. In fact, I think he liked the spare simplicity, the convenience, the company when he wanted it, and the solitude when he needed it. When Mari came for visits, she put flowers on the table and said it made them feel like newlyweds. Seamus came back every year for one semester. It soon seemed as though he had always been there with us, taking meals in the dining hall, chatting with someone in Randolph Court, reading poetry, and listening attentively and with evident pleasure to students reading their own poetry in the common rooms. Like any true survivor at Harvard, Seamus learned how to disappear and do his work. But he also loved celebrations and a good party. One of his favorite Adams occasions was the St. Patrick's Day tea at Apthorpe House. He often brought Irish friends who could sing or play the penny whistle. Students tried to dance something resembling an Irish jig. He would stand on a chair and recite poems, beaming all the while, not for the attention he was getting, but because of the attention poetry was getting. When he was informed of the Nobel Prize, he was traveling in Greece. He phoned to say he couldn't keep the astonishing news to himself. It was during a tea, so I announced it to the assembled crowd of students, who cheered so lustily he could hear them in Athens. Seamus was a great storyteller as well as a great poet. Among the many stories he told, there are two about Ireland, poets and poetry, that keep coming back to me. One night, when he was driving alone through the Irish countryside after an event, a wedding or banquet, he was stopped by a patrolman for speeding. The patrolman seemed tired, wet, and angry. "Show me your driver's license," he shouted as if to a deaf man. Seamus began fumbling around in his pockets, realizing he may have forgotten to carry it with him. The patrolman shone a flashlight into the car as if looking for contraband. "Can you identify yourself?" Seamus noticed an envelope with his name and address on the empty seat next to him. "Will this do?" The patrolman shone his light on the name, looked up and said, "The poet?" Seamus nodded modestly. "Drive on," said the patrolman. I love that story. Only in Ireland. The other story is about a poet looking for a poet who was not an Irishman. Seamus loved the poetry of Gerard Manley Hopkins. He knew that Hopkins had been sick, lonely, and unhappy in Dublin, that he died there, and though an Englishman, he was buried in Glasnevin Cemetery, where Irish patriots had also been laid to rest. One day, Seamus decided that he wanted to visit Hopkins' grave. In an almost Shakespearean scene, the young Irish poet got lost among the tombstones, unable to find his way to Hopkins until he came upon two gravediggers. "I'm looking for Gerard Manley Hopkins," he said. "Who?" "The poet, Hopkins." The first gravedigger shrugged and looked at his mate. "Have you heard of a Hopkins?" The second gravedigger scratched his chin, looked at Seamus and said, "Oh, you mean the convert?" and then glanced over his shoulder and said, with a nod, "He's over there." I hardly need to say that Seamus loved Ireland. But like those ancient Irish monks who sailed off in the curraghs and made themselves at home all over the world, Seamus was a hardy traveler. And through his poetry and generous disposition, his was a welcome presence and voice in many parts. I've saved my last memory and my most treasured copy of a message from Seamus to Harvard, to all of us, that most of you, I think, will not have read or heard. I don't think this has ever been published. In the spring of 1982, Adams House celebrated the 50th anniversary of its founding. Throughout the semester, of course this was Adams House, there were festivities, an original opera, an art show, concerts, poetry readings, and finally a banquet. Seamus, of course, was there. As a surprise, he composed a poem and dedicated it to Adams House. I now hear this as a toast to Harvard, a thank you note to all of us, and a light-hearted but serious reminder of what we can be at our best and why he liked being here, and though he doesn't put it this way, why we loved having him with us. So here's the poem. Anniversary verse. Master Kiley, guests and friends, tutors, tutees, alumni, students, you staircase dwellers whose amplified hard rock and reggae resound from every dormitory, you 50th anniversary revelers, ye maids and swains of Adams House, ye actors, athletes, sexy muses, ye gilded youth, I rise to the occasion and not disgrace my art or nation with verse that sings the old equation of beauty and truth. I rise as one who comes and goes beneath your storied walls and windows, a visitor, part tourist and part faculty, an ethnic curiosity, dubbed by grace of poetry, guest lecturer. Inspire me then, occasional muse, with verse to cure the exam blues and banish care, to greet old academic ghosts who once caroused on the Gold Coast, whose love of learning vied with lusts for flesh and beer. That I may briefly celebrate community, half collegiate and half domestic, and say a word about the way a scholar's personality can keep its health emotionally, yet stay scholastic. The diapers we first were dressed in, our graduation gowns of ermine, which would you say will mean more to us in the end? Those powdered folds pinned tight around our little backsides, or that grand scholar's regalia? All of us are amphibious between our universities and where we come from. No one gets born in a campus bed. Even the trendiest school of ed has never weaned or bathed or breastfed or wiped a bum. No co-ed dorm supplies the joys of an attic full of dusty toys and old dolls' houses. No faculty of engineering repeats the thrill of tinkering with model planes, that hankering to fly with aces. It seems illiterate solitude is the first place that the true and good awakens in us. The later freedom we call leisure cannot supply that buried treasure, which is the basis and the measure of personalities, and which we name imagination. A word I cite with much elation and some unease, because it can sound slight and airy, an entry in the dictionary, a bubble word. Yet while I'm wary, I realize all need its salutary power. All men and women must beware who would deny it, and go against their childhood's grain, and dry up like earth parched for rain. They'll grow mechanical, and then no drug or diet, no health farm, clinic, yoga course, no mantra, Om, no Star Wars force will compensate for what is lost when the mind divides. Even science now concedes the brain has two conjugal sides, the left and right, that have to marry intuition to the analytic reason for psychic balance. Head sleeps with heart, begets a creature, free, yet cornered in its nature. To be your whole self, you must mate your brains and glands. Which is why I bless the atmosphere of Adam's house and toast our master and his wife. I toast good nature in the staff, the way that nothing's done by half. Those who work hard and still can laugh are the spice of life. I like your hospitality, your literate vitality, your casual styles, the way that love of liberal arts and loves inspired by Cupid's darts have educated all your hearts is in your smiles. So all together, Gaudiemus, because as sure as my name's Seamus, today's the day for intellectuals to play. On your 50th anniversary, rejoice, as the jazzmen say. Take it away.
Quitting time. The hosed-down chamfered concrete pleases him. He'll wait a while before he kills the light on the cleaned-up yard, its pails and farrowing crate, and the cast-iron pump immobile as a herm upstanding elsewhere, in another time. More and more, this last look at the wet shine of the place is what means most to him, and to repeat the phrase, "My head is light," because it often is as he reaches back and switches off, a home-based man at home in the end with little. Except this same night after nightness, redding up the work, the song of a tubular steel gate in the dark as he pulls it to and starts his uphill trek.
Terminus. 1. When I hoped there I would find an acorn and a rusted bolt. If I lifted my eyes, a factory chimney and a dormant mountain. If I listened, an engine shunting and a trotting horse. Is it any wonder when I thought I would have second thoughts? 2. When they spoke of the prudent squirrel's hoard, it shone like gifts at a nativity. When they spoke of the mammon of iniquity, the coins in my pocket reddened like stove lids. I was the March drain and the March drain's banks, suffering the limit of each claim. 3. 2 buckets were easier carried than 1. I grew up in between. My left hand placed the standard iron weight. My right tilted a last grain in the balance. Baronies, parishes met where I was born. When I stood on the central stepping stone, I was the last earl on horseback in midstream, still parleying in earshot of his peers.
In recent years, I've taught a seminar on the poetry of Thomas Hardy and Seamus Heaney. In shaping the course, I decided to devote 1 week late in the semester to Seamus Heaney's poems of married love. Along with his poems of royal life, childhood memory, poems of political savagery, and a life of decency within political savagery, poems of great philosophic and spiritual ambition and accomplishment, there are these others that are exquisite in their intimacy, tenderness, and beauty. I titled that week of the course, Love Poems to a Married Woman, where the married woman is the woman to whom Seamus Heaney is married, Mari Heaney. I was surprised by how many of the students chose to write their papers about these poems: the otter, red, white, and blue, the skunk, the closed shrine, the underground, showing that they too had been moved by the great emotional force of these poems. Some of the students even revealed that they were awestruck by and thankful for the revelation that the discarded myth of love lasting forever might actually turn out not to be only possible, but true. I'll read one of these poems from the 2001 volume, Electric Light, the poem that's entitled The Closed Shrine. The Closed Shrine. It was a whole new sweetness in the early days to find light white muslin blouses on a see-through nylon line drip drying in the bathroom, or a nylon slip in the shine of its own electricity. As if St. Bridget once more had rigged up a ray of sun like the one she'd strung on air to dry her own cloak on. Hard-pressed Bridget so unstoppably on the go, the damp and slump and unfair drag of the workaday made light of and got through, as usual, brilliantly.
Oh
I do wish to acknowledge how many other persons could have been up here this afternoon, this evening. So many who loved Seamus on and off the page. And I see them all in this group and salute them along with our own department. In his book-length sequence of interviews entitled Stepping Stones, Seamus summons the hard-edged tricorn hat called a biretta worn by the Catholic priest. As a source of his wonderful poem, The Biretta, he recalls, here I quote, "The memory of holding a biretta by its central fin is still there between my finger and my thumb," as in digging. "As an altar boy, I was always fascinated by the materiality and weight of it, and as a child, I tended to be frightened of priests with birettas on their heads. At the same time, there was something trim and shipshape, almost airborne, about the feel of the thing. When you took it into your hand," and here we start hearing the Seamus we all recognize, that astonishing compound of the genius for natural reverence and the glint of mischief, subversion, poetic freedom. "When you took it into your hand from the priest's hand, there was a momentary temptation to launch it into the sanctuary like a paper dart or a little black-winged stealth bomber. In the end, I let that impulse stand for poetry's impulse to outstrip the given, and turned it instead into the boat of imagination that Dante launches in the opening lines of the Purgatorio." The boat of imagination. Today, we're celebrating the person who not only built and launched and piloted such boats with matchless craft, but who took us all on board. The person we loved and love. Here are two poems to launch, perhaps, into this sanctuary. The first is from Lightnings, number 8. It's from the collection Seeing Things, 1991. And it's a poem that Seamus often chose to recite and not only to read. The annals say, when the monks of Clonmacnoise were all at prayers inside the oratory, a ship appeared above them in the air. The anchor dragged along behind so deep it hooked itself into the altar rails. And then, as the big hull rocked to a standstill, a crewman shinned and grappled down the rope and struggled to release it, but in vain. "This man can't bear our life here and will drown," the abbot said, "unless we help him." So they did. The freed ship sailed, and the man climbed back out of the marvelous as he had known it. And the second poem is the most recently published of Seamus's work. Completed last June, it appeared for the first time just 2 weeks ago. It is called In a Field and was commissioned to evoke and commemorate war poets of the First World War. Seamus chose to honor Edward Thomas,
And in this poem, he conjures a childhood encounter with a demobilized, demobbed soldier returning after war to the family farm in a field. And there I was, in the middle of a field. The furrows, once called scores, still with their gloss. The tractor with its hoisted plow just gone, snarling at an unexpected speed out on the road. Last of the jobs, the windings had been plowed. Furrows turned 3-ply or 4 round each of the 4 sides of the breathing land to mark it off and out. Within that boundary now, step the fleshy earth and follow the long-heeled footprints of one who arrived from nowhere, unfamiliar and demobbed, in buttoned khaki and buffed army boots, bruising the turned-up acres of our backfield, to stumble from the winding's magic ring and take me by a hand to lead me back through the same old gate into the yard where everyone has suddenly appeared, all standing, waiting.
From Beowulf. Thanon eft je witton, al je sidas, swult je jong manig of gomen wather, from mer remodia, meran, redan, bernus, an blancum. There was Beowulf as mouthful maned, moaning oft je quath, that to soothe na north by Sam Twaonum over Erman grund, older nanig, under swale is begong, selra nara, rond habendra, reaches weirthra. Ne hiahura winedrichten, wiekt ne logon, glad noch Hrothgar, ach that was god kuning. Chwilum hawdorova, chleop on leton, on je flit far and fel wa maris, that him fold wegas fire a thuchtun, custom kude. Chwilum kuninges then, goma yilp kladen, yidde je mundig, sithe al vella al je seyen a warn je munda, word other fond, so the je bunden. Sedge eft ongan, seeth Beowulf's snutrum sturion, and on sped reckon spell yerada, wordum rixlan. Then away they rode, the old retainers, with many a young man following after, a troop on horseback, in high spirits on their bay steeds. Beowulf's doings were praised over and over again. Nowhere, they said, north or south, between the two seas, or under the tall sky, on the broad earth, was there anyone better to raise a shield or to rule a kingdom. Yet there was no laying of blame on their lord, the noble Hrothgar. He was a good king. At times the war band broke into a gallop, letting their chestnut horses race wherever they found the going good on those well-known tracks. Meanwhile, a thane of the king's household, a carrier of tales, a traditional singer deeply schooled in the lore of the past, linked a new theme to a strict meter. The man started to recite with skill, rehearsing Beowulf's triumphs and feats in well-fashioned lines, entwining his words.
As I was preparing the last section of Station Island, I had the same emotion Elaine expressed. I felt Seamus come along and say, no, you need a little Orpheus, and it should be about my wife. So the poem changed, and it's not in your book. I'll read from the Underground, from the first poem from the book Station Island, 1984. There we were in the vaulted tunnel, running. You in your going-away coat, speeding ahead, and me then, like a fleet god, gaining upon you before you turned into a reed or some new white flower jabbed with crimson as the coat flapped wild and button after button sprang off and fell in a trail between the Underground and the Albert Hall. Honeymooning, mooning around, late for the proms. Our echoes die in that corridor now. And now I come as Hansel came on the moonlit stones, retracing the path back, lifting the buttons to end up in a drafty, lamp-lit station after the trains have gone, the wet track bared and tensed as I am, all attention for your step following, and damned if I look back.
Alphabets. 1. A shadow his father makes with joined hands, and thumbs and fingers nibbles on the wall like a rabbit's head. He understands he will understand more when he goes to school. There he draws smoke with chalk the whole first week, then draws the forked stick that they call a Y. This is writing. A swan's neck and a swan's back make the two he can see now as well as say. 2 rafters and a cross tie on the slate are the letter some call A, some call A. There are charts, there are headlines, there is a right way to hold the pen and a wrong way. First, it is copying out, and then English, marked correct with a little leaning hoe. Smells of inkwells rise in the classroom hush. A globe in the window tilts like a colored O.
Two. Declensions sang on air like a hosanna as column after stratified column, book 1 of Elementa Latina, marbled and minatory, rose up in him. for he was fostered next in a stricter school named for the patron saint of the oak wood, where classes switched to the pealing of a bell, and he left the Latin forum for the shade of new calligraphy that felt like home. The letters of this alphabet were trees. The capitals were orchards in full bloom. The lines of script like briars coiled in ditches. Here, in her snooded garment and bare feet, all ringleted in assonance and wood notes, the poet's dream stole over him like sunlight and passed into the tenebrous thickets. He learns this other writing. He is the scribe who drove a team of quills on his white field. Round his cell door, the blackbirds dart and dab. Then self-denial, fasting, the pure cold. By rules that hardened the farther they reached north, he bends to his desk and begins again. Christ's sickle has been in the undergrowth. The script grows bare and Merovingian.
Three. The globe has spun. He stands in a wooden O. He alludes to Shakespeare. He alludes to graves. Time has bulldozed the school and the school window. Balers drop bales like printouts, where stooked sheaves made lambdas on the stubble once at harvest. And the delta face of each potato pit was patted straight and molded against frost. All gone. With the omega that kept watch above each door, the good luck horseshoe. Yet shaped note language, absolute on air as Constantine's sky-lettered in hoc signo, can still command him. Or the necromancer, who would hang from the domed ceiling of his house a figure of the world with colors in it, so that the figure of the universe, and not just single things, would meet his sight when he walked abroad. As from his small window the astronaut sees all that he has sprung from, the risen, aqueous, singular, lucent O, like a magnified and buoyant ovum. Or like my own wide, pre-reflective stare, all agog at the plasterer on his ladder, skimming our gable and writing our name there with his trowel point, letter by strange letter.
I'd just like to mention that the beautiful poem we just heard in 3 parts, alphabets, was written especially for Harvard's Phi Beta Kappa ceremony and added to the line of distinguished poems for that ceremony over the years. Seamus gave the worksheets for it to us. I'm reading 3 poems. The first, a marriage poem, written in Glanmore, and I should remind you that Lorenzo and Jessica are the the young love couple in The Merchant of Venice, and Dermot and Grania are medieval lovers in Ireland. To asperge something is to make a shaker of water over it to bless it, and incense you all know. Glanmore Sonnets 10. I dreamt we slept in a moss in Donegal, on turf banks, under blankets, with our faces exposed all night in a wetting drizzle, pallid as the dripping sapling birches. Lorenzo and Jessica in a cold climate. Dermot and Grania waiting to be found. Darkly asperged and sensed, we were laid out like breathing effigies on a raised ground. And in that dream I dreamt, how like you this, our first night years ago in that hotel, when you came with your deliberate kiss to raise us towards the lovely and painful covenants of flesh. Our separateness, the respite in our dewy, dreaming faces. Seamus wrote a sequence of elegies for his mother, clearances, and this is the last one in which he discovers that an absence can be more bright than presence. I thought of walking round and round a space utterly empty, utterly a source, where the decked chestnut tree had lost its place in our front hedge above the wallflowers. The white chips jumped and skited high. I heard the hatchet's differentiated, accurate cut, the crack, the sigh and collapse of what luxuriated through the shocked tips and wreckage of it all. Deep planted and long gone, my coeval chestnut from a jam jar in a hole, its heft and hush become a bright nowhere, a soul ramifying and forever silent, beyond silence listened for. Seamus represents himself in this elegy for his father as someone shivering in a cottage where the roof has decayed, fallen, the thatch roof has gone. There isn't any furniture, there is only a cold hearth, there's no fire any longer. And he stands there as the child that has lost its roof and has become a beggar in consequence. He mentions the particular judgment, which is the last judgment, as given separately to each person after death. Shifting brilliancies, then winter light in a doorway, and on the stone doorstep, a beggar shivering in silhouette. So the particular judgment might be set. Bare wallstead and a cold hearth reigned into. Bright puddle where the soul-free cloud life roams. And after the commanded journey, what? Nothing magnificent, nothing unknown. A gazing out from far away, alone. And it is not particular at all, just old truth dawning. There is no next time round. Unroofed scope, knowledge freshening wind.
Before Keir and I play the final piece, I want to note that we picked the Messiaen and the Janacek because we love the pieces and because they felt right. But I was gratified to stumble across the fact that Mr. Heaney also loved Janacek and indeed wrote poetry based on Janacek's music and went to Prague to study his work. So this piece is for him, and perhaps it's no accident. Janacek was known as the eternally young old man near the end of his life, which also seems appropriate.